All right, welcome back. We are talking about China today. And before we get into China proper, there are two individuals I want to highlight. These two gentlemen right here. So this is Gordon Chang and Adrian Zenz. Okay, so let's look into Gordon Chang first. But first, here's this one book by Gordon Chang, The Coming Collapse of China. And then Adrian Zenz, he's the main guy behind the whole Uyghur situation. So sterilizations, IUDs, and mandatory birth control, the CCP's campaign to suppress Uyghur birth rates in Xinjiang. So The Coming Collapse of China was published in 2001. And Chang argued that the Chinese Communist Party was the root cause of many of China's problems and would cause the collapse of the country by 2011. So this is from the wiki, and let's just read what this says from Gordon Chang's wiki. So let's read what it says here. So the author of The Coming Collapse of China, Chang, has made numerous predictions of the imminent collapse of the Chinese government and fall of the Communist Party since 2001, including the specific years. Chang insisted that it would be year 2011 when the Chinese government would collapse. When 2011 was almost over, he admitted that his prediction was wrong, but said that he was off by only a year and wrote in the Foreign Policy magazine that instead of 2011, the mighty Communist Party of China will fall in 2012. Bet on it. Consequently, he made Foreign Policy's 10 worst predictions of the year twice in a row when his predictions were proven wrong again. So this dude, he just always predicts China's going to collapse, China's going to fall, and then he always says China's horrible, China's this, China's that. He has nothing good to say about China. And he predicts his collapse. He's been predicting this collapse for the last 20 years. And it's just, I don't know. I don't know how this dude is going to cope with what's coming. So time out. So this is the military parade. So the U.S. military parade 2 months ago versus the Chinese military parade that was about a week ago now. And the U.S. military parade, these guys just look just like, look, we just need free healthcare. We just need to be able to go to the VA. They like, I just need money to go to college. Like, they look so unenthused, so uninspired. But you look at what the Chinese military parade and what they showed and the tech that they showed, and it just looks like so primp, so proper, such a well-oiled, disciplined fighting force that I don't think the guys up top are trying to see for real. You know what I'm saying? So let's look at this, a little bit of this footage.
National and military flags. The formation of the Guard of Honor of the PLA is marching toward us. The People's Armed Forces, under the leadership of the CPC, are always the defenders of the country, socialism, and people's interest.
The U.S. spending trillions of dollars on its military, and this is what you get. This is what, in the Chinese military, that's what it looks like. A military looks like when they're defending the homeland, when that's their purpose. The U.S. military, that's what it looks like when it's like no pride, no honor. You're just a fighting force used to go loot the rest of the planet. Now, anyways, this is what Gordon Chang had to say about the Chinese parade. Remember, he has nothing good to say about China ever.
Because this week, China hosted its largest ever military parade to commemorate the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II. International leaders, including North Korea's Kim Jong-un and Russian President Vladimir Putin, were in attendance as China touted advanced jets, tanks, missiles, and drones. So to start off the conversation, what are some of your takeaways from the event?
This was information warfare at its finest. We saw China try to give the appearance of being strong. And over the last 3 or 4 weeks, Chinese propagandists, state, party, and the informal ones, have been showing off China's military hardware and making the case that China now is a strong power. This sort of reminds me of the ancient Chinese military strategist Sun Tzu, and one of his more famous sayings was, "When weak, appear strong." So I think that part of that's what's going on right now. Now, of course, China has a large military. It's very capable. It has some weapons that we don't have. So, yes, it is a strong military, but I don't think it is nearly as strong as it portrays itself to be. There are a lot of reasons for that. But at this moment, I think that we are seeing a show, first of all, meant directed to the Chinese people to show that the Communist Party is capable, but also to the rest of the world to intimidate them.
So, China wanted to show, they're celebrating their victory against, their victory in World War II against the Japanese who came to try to colonize them and killed millions of Chinese. The reason why, it's not about Victory Day. It's not none of that. You know what I mean? It's just to intimidate the rest of the world. But I wonder what Gordon Chang said about the U.S. Military parade that Trump had. I guess I would love to hear what he had to say about that one. But anything, to intimidate the rest of it's just ridiculous, man. I mean, you can't even listen to this guy. Seriously, Gordon Chang is just deeply unserious. So now we'll get to Adrian Zenz. So this is from Global Times. So they went in on him. Now, Global Times is a Chinese media outlet, but they didn't pull any punches when it comes to this guy. So Xinjiang think tank unveils Adrian Zenz as swindler under academic disguise. So they kind of went in on him. So a German scholar named Adrian Zenz has recently stood out on the anti-China stage with his reports accusing China of detaining Uyghurs and other minority groups or imposing sterilization on ethnic minorities in its Xinjiang region. Zenz has been welcomed by the U.S. and Western media as a leading expert on Xinjiang. Of course he was. So now, from just reading the highlighted, from where do these charges against China come from and what evidence accompanies them? Until 2018, little was said about Xinjiang. Suddenly, however, it was the front and center of the news just at the time when the Chinese-led Belt and Road Initiative, set to radically reorient the world economic order and heavily dependent on Xinjiang, came into play. That's exactly what it was. That's exactly what this is about, the Belt and Road Initiative. A man central to this sudden elevation of interest was Adrian Zenz, a fundamentalist end times apocalyptic Christian fiercely opposed to homosexuality and gender equality and pro-physical punishment of children. He came from obscurity to suddenly being claimed to be an expert in China and Xinjiang. Zenz describes his work concerning Xinjiang as a mission. Of course, Zenz has significant backers being employed by the Victims of Communism Memorial Foundation. The beginning of the U.S. trade war with China and the sudden emergence of stories concerning oppression of the Uyghurs, Zenz has been invited to testify before the U.S. Congress. Why the hell does Congress all of a sudden out of nowhere, they care about Uyghurs and Xinjiang, right? And it just comes out of nowhere. Then they flood the airwaves with, oh my God, there's a genocide happening. Now, mind you, I want to see some bodies. I want to see some footage. It's no way. Y'all were occupying, y'all invaded and y'all were occupying Afghanistan for 20 years. Afghanistan borders Xinjiang province. If you guys had some evidence, some footage, something, we would know that. Right. We know there's a genocide going on in Gaza right now. And I have plenty of footage we can show you. We have plenty of admissions on I-24 of people, Zionists, telling you how they feel about these people that they're slaughtering. Right. Why don't we have all that here in China with the Uyghurs in Xinjiang province? Right. It's almost like it's just nonsense. So Zenz figures of supposed detained Uyghurs, which keep rising, come from reports by Istiklal TV, a Uyghur exile media organization based in Turkey, and Radio Free Asia, a U.S.-funded news agency created by the CIA. Another source central to these claims is the Chinese Human Rights Defenders, an organization almost entirely funded by the U.S. government through the National Endowment for Democracy. I've talked about the National Endowment for Democracy on this channel before. Radio Free Asia, we'll do a deep dive into them. We don't even need to do a deep dive. This is just a U.S.-owned radio station that just spews State Department propaganda to people in Asia. So, let's see why Zenz and Chang are just have a massive hard on for negative China press. So Congress proposes $500 million for negative coverage of China. The effort to counter China's malign influence. So the Belt and Road Initiative, that's malign influence, right? Because, you know, the Westerners want the whole world and all its resources under its control. People coming together and saying, hey, let's trade amongst each other. Let's make sure we live well and we can help each other out. We can trade our resources. We can barter. We can do this and we can live a nice, healthy life. The West is like, no, we need to insert ourselves into this and make money off of it and have your resources flow to us. That's what this is all about. The U.S. does not want the world. They don't do that. They do not want a multipolar world, a world that's like, you know, thriving and sharing and like living in a communal society, because we don't have to have all this competition. We can trade and live comfortably with each other. But the U.S. has to dominate. The West has to dominate. Right. So this is the West's malign influence right here. $500 million for negative news coverage of China. Why don't we use that money for you know, there are public transportation systems all over the country right now that are cash strapped. Why don't we use that money for this? We have public health initiatives that aren't funded. We have people losing jobs because we have SNAP benefits that are being rolled back. Why don't we use why don't we use that money for this? But no, everything is used by the elite and the upper class to make sure that you have no positive views of anything outside of America, and that you have an inflated sense of adoration for the Western world itself. That's what this is all about. So anyways, in an effort to counter China's malign influence, would fund negative coverage of China's Belt and Road Initiative while also beefing up U.S.'s international lending. So to highlight it here, a tech and manufacturing bill currently moved through Congress allocates $500 million for media outlets to produce journalism for overseas audiences that is critical of China, meant to combat Chinese disinformation. So you want to create disinformation to combat So you want to create disinformation to combat Chinese disinformation. Okay, whatever. So U.S. to offer millions in new funds to take on China. If they look, swim, or quack like U.S. influence operations, they probably are U.S. influence operations, especially when they come to an annual price tag of U.S. $300 million to be authorized as law by the U.S. Congress, of which $10 million has been earmarked especially for Hong Kong. And this is 2021. Remember those clearly NED, USAID, Hong Kong uprisings and I won't even call it uprisings, those protests. Then those people got taken. The whole fallout of that was amazing. And a lot of those NED funded people got what they deserved. A $500 million business, America's state-sponsored anti-China propaganda. Wait, let's read some of that. So $500 million, that's a sum of money the U.S. Congress planned to allocate to churn out negative news coverage on China. First reported by the American Prospect on February 9th, the bill was stuffed into the China-centered America Competes Act that just got passed by the U.S. House of Representatives earlier this month. And this is written on February 28th, 2022. The majority of the $500 million fund will go to the U.S. Agency for Global Media, a state-run media service that oversees Voice of America, Radio Free Europe, and Radio Free Asia. Again, these are U.S.-owned media outlets, which have a record of blurring the line between objective news coverage and pro-American propaganda. The article wrote, absolutely. You just gotta just listen to Voice of America for yourself, or Radio Free Asia for yourself, or Radio Free Europe for that matter. It's nothing but State Department nonsense, and no other perspectives are allowed. The U.S. bill that could turn up the heat in the anti-China propaganda war. The U.S. is upping the ante in its information war with China, with the House of Representatives backing a bill to spend U.S. $1.6 billion within 5 years to promote anti-China propaganda, according to observers. The Countering PRC Malign Influence Fund Authorization Act of 2023 is called. It was passed 351 to 36 earlier in the month. So this article is September 28th, 2024. It's published by Yahoo. passed 351 to 36 early in the month and require Senate and presidential approval by law. All right. I need to follow up on this and see if it actually. And then we have responsible statecraft here. House passes $1.6 billion to deliver anti-China propaganda overseas. Somehow, I love this subtitle. Somehow it's a crime when Russia does it to us, but good information ops when we want to discredit Beijing Belt and Road initiatives worldwide. See, this is the world-based, the rules-based order. The rules are it's okay when we do it, but you're not allowed to. You follow our rules. No, we make the rules and you follow our orders. That's what it is with the rules-based order. That's what the Western world thinks it is. Again, they think this is like the 1800s when they are just the colonial masters of the world. Still, they don't understand what's coming. So yeah, $500 million. So Pentagon ran secret anti-vax campaign to undermine China during the pandemic. This is wild. So look at this. So Democracy Now! Reporting from Reuters, or on Reuters reporting, Pentagon ran covert anti-vax smear campaign against China during pandemic. So, you know, to me, this just goes to show the United States is not about public health. They don't give a damn about people around the world. They don't give a damn about people's health. It's all about subversion, you know? To implement the anti-vax campaign, the Department of Defense overrode strong objections from top U.S. diplomats in Southeast Asia at the time, Reuters found. Sources involved in its planning and execution say the Pentagon, which ran the program through the Military Psychological Operations Center in Tampa, Florida, disregarded the collateral impact that such propaganda may have on innocent Filipinos. We weren't looking at this from a public health perspective, a senior military officer involved in the program said. We were looking at how we could drag China through the mud. So some people, so this was launched, they launched this smear campaign in the Philippines. And it wasn't about, you know, how effective the Chinese vaccination was. It was just about, and they didn't really care if people would skip it and then die, you know, as a result of it. Like they said, we weren't looking at this from a public health perspective. We just wanted to drag China through the mud. This is how the U.S. operates in the world. This is what the Pentagon, you know, that now has $1 billion budget and can't pass an audit. This is what they spend their money doing. And look at U.S. health outcomes in return. And look at how many people die from COVID in the United States as a result. This government does not care about you, U.S. citizens. One day you guys will realize that. But anyways, let's keep it going. So the biggest bombshell, this is from Newsweek, about the Pentagon's anti-vax campaign from a new report. This is published on June 14th, 2024. So this is like, you know, 4 years after the whole shutdown. So the United States military purportedly pushed an anti-vaccine disinformation campaign in the throes of the COVID-19 pandemic to counter Chinese narratives, according to a report by Reuters published on Friday. At least 300 fake social media accounts were created on Platform X, formerly Twitter, meant to propagate theories that China's Sinovac vaccine was not successful in countering the effects of coronavirus, because they wanted you to buy their coronavirus shots, not the Chinese ones. This is what this was all about. It's about deceiving people so that they can make money. They don't give a fuck about your health. All right. Lu Pengyu, spokesperson for the Embassy of the People's Republic of China, told Newsweek via email that China's vaccines are safe and effective and have played an important role in responding to the challenges and epidemics and saving people's lives. The U.S. has spread Chinese-related disinformation in an organized and well-planned way for a long time, and it's America's important approach to wage a battle of perception against China, Pengyu said. China firmly opposes the United States' use of false information and false narratives to stigmatize and demonize China. So some more here. The disinformation campaign reportedly began during Donald Trump's presidency and continued once President Joe Biden took office, and later the latter administration of which attempted to separate itself from the campaign. However, this is bipartisan. You know, this article came out during Biden's presidency, so of course he would be like, you know, we want to separate. No, the fuck you. I don't believe that at all. The Biden White House issued an edict in spring 2021 banning the anti-vax effort, which was disparaged vaccines produced by other rivals, and the Pentagon initiated an internal review, Reuters found. Wonder what came out of that. Probably nothing, because I don't really take any credence with that at all. A senior Defense Department official told Reuters that the U.S. military engaged in secret propaganda to disparage China's vaccine. A Pentagon spokeswoman told Reuters the U.S. military uses a variety of platforms, including social media, to counter those malign influence attacks aimed at the U.S. allies and partners. So again, the U.S. always makes itself the victim. So we know their ulterior motives, right? They always have to smear their enemies because the U.S. really can't compete. The U.S. is just an empire of narratives. They can't show you that they're better. They have to just tell you and then propagandize you into thinking that. So since the U.S. can't compete, they spend hundreds of millions of dollars and billions of dollars into influence campaigns and like hiring influencers to like deceive you. Right. And then want to blame everybody else and accuse everybody else of doing the same thing. We'll go over an article at some point about how the U.S. just always projects its own image on everybody else. They do it all the time. Moving on. So let's talk about Glenn Green. Let's watch this video on breaking points and counterpoints. The Counterpoints show. Breaking points. And Glenn Greenwald, he talks about the Pentagon secret anti-vax program that was aimed at smearing China. So let's listen to what he has to say. Okay, and let me fix the audio. All right, I think I got the volume fixed, so let's give it another shot.
In the show.
Always great to be with you guys. Thanks for asking.
Now, the story we're here to talk about Reuters blew the lid off of this insane story about a Pentagon operation targeted at people in the Philippines who could have benefited from the Chinese COVID vaccine Sinovac. A lot of people might have remembered some of the coverage surrounding it at the time. But what we didn't know is that the Pentagon was running, as the Reuters headline you can see on your screen there says, a quote anti-vax campaign that was aimed at actually just undermining China's status in the Philippines, obviously at a critical time in the way the Pentagon sees it for the relationship between the Philippines and China, but used this vaccine as an opening to come in and try to sow distrust. And, Glenn, it's likely that lives were lost as a result of this campaign from China or from the United States Pentagon.
Yeah, there's so many amazing aspects to the story, and I do think we should begin, as critics of corporate media, all three of us are, to acknowledge that this is actually the kind of investigative reporting I wish these large media outlets did more of, where they're not exposing bad acts by foreign governments we're told to hate, but actually the things that our own government does. Those are the things we most need to hear. This was actually a very, not just good investigation, but well-reported article on this program. And there's so many aspects to it. First of all, this was done at a time when we were being told that there's nothing graver or worse or more immoral than for one country to interfere into the political discourse of other countries using covert disinformation campaigns and fake Twitter and Facebook bots. And of course, the United States has been doing that for so long. It has been doing it not just since the Cold War, but even recently. And that's why this idea that, Russia had stepped so far to the line of decency and normalcy by putting up Facebook, fake Twitter bots and the like in 2016 was such a joke, not because it wasn't wrong what Russia was doing, but it was because it's completely standard practice that our own government does constantly, as this investigation and so many others show. But the other aspect of it is, this is being done at a time when if you were an American citizen and raising doubts about the vaccine, either its efficacy or its safety, you would almost immediately be banned from being heard online at the demand of the U.S. government. You could lose your job if you didn't take the vaccine. You would lose the ability to have free movement. So our government was imposing this demand that we take the vaccine, that nobody question the vaccine. And at the same time, our government was engaged in a secret disinformation campaign using fake Twitter and Facebook profiles and the like in order to manipulate people in the Philippines, but also in the Middle East, not to take the vaccine that China was offering for free. They were trying to help the people in the region, whether for motives of self-interest or whatever, while the United States had basically told Pfizer and the other health pharmaceutical companies, you can sell to the rest of the world for whatever prices you want. So they were really trying to prevent people from taking a vaccine that in the United States they were telling us was a life-saving vaccine that we had to take. And the motive was so hideous, which was to drag these people away from China and force them to buy from American pharmaceutical companies in order to separate these countries from China.
There you have it, guys. Glenn is right on point with this. It was economic, and it's just about sticking it to an enemy that the U.S. does not like and wants to overthrow at some point. That's what the whole Taiwan situation is all about. But we'll get into that later. But yeah, so now you see the MO of the United States, how they move. So without further ado, welcome to China, but at what cost? All right, let's get into it. So there seems to be a general directive for Western media outlets with regards to like official Western enemies. I've noticed, like when you look at Russia, it's said that they weaponize everything, right? But with China, the emphasis is on economic competition. So any undeniable Chinese achievement must be made out to be somehow a bad investment, according to the Western press. Remember, they're spending $500,000 or $500 million, right? $500 million and $1.6 billion over 5 years to just churn out nonstop anti-China. You must hate China at all costs. All right. You must be afraid of China. You must think China. Anytime you think China, you must have a negative connotation along with it. That's what the Western world wants you to have. And they control the media in the West. So if you only watch Western media, man, this is why we have an obligation to educate the community. Okay. So any undeniable Chinese achievement must be made out to somehow be a bad investment. So the directive must read, when writing about China's achievements, always question the costs. All right. So remember, the U.S. offers millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars to write anti-Chinese propaganda. All right. So we're about to see several examples. So in the equation, just for a reminder, the equation is any positive China news must be met with FUD, which is fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and also concern trolling about any of the potential benefits. All right. So that's the equation. Any positive China news must be met with FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and concern trolling. And just to define concern trolling, because some people might not know what that is. So concern trolling is when you pretend to be on the side of the people you disagree with and try to undermine their arguments with concerns, so you're pretending to be down for the cause. You're pretending that, you're with it, but you're basically working against that position by, I'm concerned about this. I'm concerned about that. The U.S. does this all the time. You know what I mean? Like, well, what about they try to concern troll around like virtue signaling, like, or, identity politics and shit like that. It's so disingenuous. But a lot of people, like, so many people, like liberals on the left, like American left. Like American left is like center right, to be honest with you. But people who follow the Democrats here fall for that shit all the time. Right. So that's what concern trolling is. All right. So let's get into it. So remember the equation. Any positive China news must be met with FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, plus concern trolling about any of the potential benefits. Okay. So with that, without further ado, we'll get into the examples. All right. So China, powers ahead, but at what cost? China invests in Ethiopia. China's Minister of Commerce says trade with Ethiopia will reach $3 billion by 2015. So this was published in 2010. So China invests in Ethiopia, but at what cost? And let's look at this. Let's look into this article a little bit. So China's new engagement with Africa is played out very differently across the continent, helping revitalize moribund economies in some countries while breeding resentment elsewhere due to support of unsavory regimes. Citation needed. Whose resentment and who considers these regimes unsavory? They don't go into that. Poor work practices and threatening local industries. Okay, now they get into an example of threatening local industries, but at the very end of the article, right? So they make the accusations, but they don't always follow up with evidence, right? They just make the claim. So that's what they get to do in the West. You know, since people just believe everything they're told by the Western world, the West can just get away with just making a claim and then not even providing evidence, and then people just believe it. Like, we have a lot of anti-intellectual people in the West, and I think Americans literally are the dumbest people on planet Earth, because they just believe they just lap up this dumbass propaganda with no critical thinking applied to it at all. So anyways, let's keep going. Ethiopian Prime Minister Meles Zenawi says African states must be prudent in setting the parameters of the relationship. The Chinese interest in Ethiopia has been nothing short of a godsend, he tells the Irish Times. And I have an anecdote about about what Meles just said here. Now, Meles passed away a while ago, but I was in Ethiopia when he was prime minister, when the Chinese and the Ethiopians were working on a project. And I won't get into the anecdotes right now, but what he says makes a lot of sense about setting the parameters for the relationship, because there was an issue between the Ethiopian engineers and the Chinese engineers at that time that saw massive blackouts where only a third of Addis had power each night due to this mishap between the Chinese engineers and the Ethiopian engineers, who were digging the tunnel from two opposite sides but missed each other, is the story I heard. So but anyways, to continue, we have benefited massively from it, but like everything else, it is capable of becoming a nightmare. It is up to the host countries as to how they use the available resources from the Chinese in the best possible manner. Those who do will benefit, and those who do not may not benefit as perhaps they ought to. And that makes sense. Like, if you mismanage and things like that, and that is true, you know. China's assistance in building infrastructure and its investment in manufacturing has been invaluable to Ethiopia, Meles said. So you find this sentiment all over the continent today, right? Now, this was in, when was this written? 2010? But China has a good reputation on the continent for the most part, because they actually leave tangible things in return, whereas the West just extracts and then just leaves propaganda saying that, you know, we're great and you should be happy that we're here. So, but as in every African country ruling Beijing, there's a debate over who stands to gain. So this is the anti-China propaganda here. A 2008 study by an economist at Addis Ababa University noted that while Ethiopian consumers would benefit from cheap Chinese imports, small local firms, particularly in the clothing and footwear sectors, will lose out. So that's what they were talking about in the previous one when they were saying threatening local industries. But opposition figures like many in the do I have any more? Oh, yeah. Opposition figures, like many of their counterparts elsewhere in Africa, mutter darkly about deals agreed upon behind closed doors and speculate the motives of both the government and Beijing. So again, this is just shit. We're hearing this, so we just want to input this. It's nothing factual here, nothing cited, just opposition figures. What opposition figures? Like many of their counterparts elsewhere in Africa, where at in Africa, mutter darkly about ideas agreed behind closed doors. What are you talking about? Give details. And speculate. What speculation on the motives of both the government and Beijing? It just sounds, they just laundered their own bias into these articles and just put them in there. You know what I'm saying? And that's what they want your takeaway to be. So anyways, China has luxury property boom, but at what cost? China pumps up Cambodia economy, but at what cost? In remix for the Taipei Times, China pumps up Cambodian economy, but at what cost? China brings jobs to Ethiopia, but at what cost? So this is Jeffrey Sachs on the Belt and Road Initiatives. And on the Chinese Belt and Road Initiative, and I probably should have put a slide on here explaining what the Belt and Road Initiative is, but I think Jeffrey Sachs will explain it here. He's from Columbia University. He was on a Jay Martin show. I've never seen that show before, but this was a great clip. And he talks about the Belt and Road Initiative and the U.S.'s fear, uncertainty, and doubt response to it. So let's listen to what Jeffrey Sachs has to say.
2 more questions for you. We got time? Okay. All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, we know. All right. First of all, I got to get your thoughts on the Belt and Road Initiative. And specifically, I'd like you, because I think you're for it.
Yes.
In favor. It's positive global, in terms of global economic growth. And I know you have that opinion from a boots on the ground standpoint. You're not reading headlines. You were recently in Ethiopia, I believe, among other things, visiting with some farmers who are the beneficiaries of this program. How do you balance that with the concept of debt diplomacy and predatory infrastructure lending and this concept?
Yep. So basically, the Belt and Road Initiative is a bit like what the United States did in the 1950s, which is to say our industry, our technology is going abroad, and we will help build infrastructure, power grids, power systems, and so forth, to facilitate that. We did that in the 1950s in our development aid programs. China started to do that basically about a dozen years ago in this Belt and Road Initiative. And their idea is modern infrastructure. Could be fast rail, and it would be nice if the United States had a little of that. It could be power grid, electricity. It could be port facilities, and so forth. And China will finance that substantially with institutions like the China Development Bank or the Bank of China or the China Export-Import Bank. And the partner countries will get a modern rail service or a modern power grid. I'm all for it. I just think, that spreads development. It's good for China. They sell exports. So this is Chinese businesses by and large. China would like to get its debt back, so it wants to be repaid. I have one piece of advice to the Chinese, which I repeat to them all the time, which is instead of the typical 7 to 10 year loans that they're making in the Belt and Road program, they should be 20 to 30 year loans. Because if you lend to Ethiopia, don't ask for the money back in 7 years or 10 years. That's an impoverished country. It's going to take 20 or 30 years to get your money back. So I do have one. It's not a quibble. It's an advice. This is the first time China's done this, and I'm pointing out to them that the maturity of their loans really matters when you're lending to poor countries, because you don't want to trap them. Now, the United States says, it's a trap. It's a ploy. This is false completely. This is U.S. propaganda, bad-mouthing, PR operations. Why? Because the U.S. doesn't have a program like this. If the U.S. just said, okay, you don't want the Chinese, we'll build the fast rail. Oh my God, if we only had fast rail, we would do it, by the way. We don't even have fast rail. So, but the point I'm making is that the U.S. has to badmouth this as part of its geopolitical play. I go to these countries, I see the investments, I talk to the governments, I advise some of the governments. This is a good thing. If there is a debt trap, and there has been in some countries, it's not because the loan is bad or because the infrastructure is bad. It's because the maturity is too low. So that's what I'm working on right now, is to extend the maturity structure of this. But otherwise, it's a very good project, and the United States should have a similar project if we want friends and connectivity for our industry.
Yeah.
So that was Jeffrey Sachs on the Belt and Road Initiative and, the U.S.'s FUD response on, and smearing everything that the Chinese do. You know what I mean? If you've actually been to these places in the global South, Americans, I encourage you to actually get a passport and actually travel to other places and not just go on a resort somewhere or just go to Europe and shit. Like, actually go to the global South and see how people live, enjoy the culture, experience the food, talk to people. You might actually fucking learn something instead of just watching like this nonsense on MSNBC and CNN, right? So let's keep moving. China is getting smarter, but at what cost? China, its economy is stabilizing, but at what cost? China gets the red carpet rolled out for it in Serbia, but at what cost? China erases extreme poverty, but at what cost? And look at this. Look at the subtitle. China has spent heavily to help its poorest citizens, an approach that few developing countries can afford, and even Beijing may struggle to sustain. So that's the at what cost right there. So The thing is, so China erases extreme poverty, but the at what cost here is but other developing nations can't afford to, and China may struggle to sustain it. So that's the but at what cost. So it's not worth, erasing extreme poverty because what other developing nations can't afford to, and it might not be sustainable. And how do you know it's not sustainable for them, for the Chinese? I feel like they have a lot more money than the U.S. does, with 37 trillion in debt, right? The U.S. is insolvent. That's why it needs to go around and lie to people about vaccines so they can get theirs purchased, because they're broke. China, industrial wind policy is success, but at what cost? Let's dig into this one. So, check this out. The Chinese wind industry's expansion is an undeniably impressive story. The world's second largest economy is the world's largest onshore and offshore wind market in terms of both generation and capacity. China is not only firmly embedded across wind industry value chains, particularly in the mining and processing of rare earth elements, but it is also at the forefront of developing the world's largest and most efficient wind turbines. So that sounds great, right? They even say that China's wind industry expansion is an undeniably impressive story. So where does the but at what cost comes in? Yet China's emergence as a world's leading player in wind has been costly. There it is, guys. There it is. Beijing's wind capacity development to less than ideal locations has been inefficient. So Beijing's wind capacity deployment to less than ideal locations has been inefficient. That's number one. While its failure to build corresponding transmission connections stunted growth in some of its windiest provinces. So this is the United States. This is the West trying to tell China how to better place their windmills, and they need to build better corresponding transmission connections in their windiest provinces. Okay, United States, since when are you the expert on like wind energy? Since when is most of our energy is produced in such a sustainable way, right? But they have, so again, the concern trolling, right? But you're doing a great job. Your wind industry's expansion is undeniably impressive, but it's costly because you could have did it this way. You could have mind your business. It's not your country. They can put their windmills anywhere they want to. And I'm sure their engineers are probably a lot better than ours. They build much more impressive shit. Go to the YouTube channel, go to B1 or any of the engineering channels and look at the mega projects that are going on in China. The stuff that we're doing in the US is just, you might as well be building shit with Legos, man. Moreover, Beijing's acquisition of wind technology, sometimes by outright theft, citation needed. This is another trope that the West always does. They always accuse somebody else. Whenever they get ahead of the West in technology, they accuse them of stealing. They accuse Russia and China of stealing hypersonic missile technology. I'm like, the U.S. doesn't even have hypersonic missiles yet. So how they steal it from y'all, but y'all don't have it? It makes no sense. Okay, it only makes sense if the West is the center of your universe, like they pretend to be, or they think they are, and they position themselves in the media to be, right? You have to be an absolute idiot to like eat any of this stuff up, and you have to be somebody who just doesn't apply any critical thinking skills whatsoever. You just turn your brain off whenever you hear anything from the West. China's successes and failures provide lessons to other countries seeking to use their own wind industrial policies to address climate change and strengthen economic growth. Wow, man. Wow. So, China, safe from COVID, but at what cost? So Wuhan, 1 year on, the city that appears safe from COVID, but at what cost, right? So it was the 1 year after the COVID-19 pandemic erupted, our China correspondent returns to Wuhan and asks whether all is really as it seems. Of course, they're going to make up some shit about it not being all, anything to find something negative and put a negative spin on something, they will find it. Trust me. Just so you will hate China. China avoids massive COVID deaths, unlike the U.S., but at what cost? Shanghai was once a symbol of modernity and openness. Xi's ruthless strategy risking a very bleak future. See, the U.S. has high COVID deaths because we're free, guys. We're freedom and democracy. China has very few deaths, not because of public health, but because, they're authoritarian and everything has to be spun into a negative light. Everything has to be spun negatively. It's remarkable. China successfully cleans up air pollution. May have accelerated global warming though, says a study. So that's but at what cost, right? So China, if we wanted to rewrite this to add, but at what cost, we would say China's success in cleaning up air pollution, but at what cost, right? That's how we would do that. And at what cost would be accelerated global accelerated global warming. All right. So Reddit had a field day with this one. So here are some quotes from this article. You got to read this. Please read this. Okay. Please read this from The Hill. All right. Written by Sharon Udison. All right. On 7/14/2025. All right. Just 2 months ago. Here goes some quotes. Efforts to clean up air pollution in China and across East Asia may have inadvertently contributed to a spike in global warming, a new study has found. The decline in aerosol emissions, which can cool the planet by absorbing sunlight, have added about 0.05 degrees Celsius in warming per decade since 2010, according to the study published on Monday in Communications in Earth and Environment. Oh my gosh. So somebody laughed at this. And here's another quote. Despite posing health threats to plants, humans, and other animals, these particles are among many types of aerosols that also cool the planet. And they said, you can't make this shit up. Like, you really can't. You got to read this article. The hoops they try to jump through to just try to make this out to be a negative thing is just like remarkable. The people of the global South. So this is somebody just commenting. The people of the global South need to suffer and die so that their betters in the West can continue to maintain their way of life. That pretty much has been the standard discussion when it comes to climate change. Yes, it has been, right? Everybody has to cut emissions except the West. They get to pollute ad infinitum. But the rest of the world, no, you can't develop because that'll be bad for climate. That'll be bad for climate change. You can't develop. They want to be the only ones who have development. The West, basically. They want to keep everybody else poor. That's why they hate China so much. Sad how China is always so short-sighted. This is sarcasm here. Instead of shouldering responsibility for the entire world's climate crisis, they've selfishly decided to prioritize their own nation's public health. In doing so, they fiendishly robbed their citizens of a chance to self-sacrifice for the greater good of the world. Probably should have said the greater good of the West. Now they must suffer the indignity of increased lifespans. As usual, they leave it up to the forward-thinking West to fix the world's problems. We've no choice now but to replace all gasoline and electric vehicles with diesel and revert to 100% coal power generation in order to cool ourselves beneath a cozy and relaxing fog of particulates. So, people are having fun with this. So remember, guys, we saw the equation. Any positive news about China must be met with FUD and concern trolling. All right. So the only conclusion we can come to here, your only takeaway from this should be China bad, okay? Because the West says so. So, this is a guy, Cyrus Jansen. This is the last clip we'll show. He was on the Piers Morgan show. And I thought this was an awesome clip. And I just wanted to, share this as well.
Cyrus, let me come to you. At the core of this, you've got the two superpowers. You've got the United States of America, you've got China. They are both huge superpowers. Historically, America has been number one. It's very arguable now that is still the case. We may not know the full extent of China's power, but you know China well. What do you think China's actual aspiration is for the world?
It's a great question, Piers, and I think it's very simple when you look at how China has transformed over the last 40 years. I mean, let's not forget that over 800 million people in China have been lifted out of poverty into the middle class. I think when you go to China and you spend time there, Piers, you know this firsthand. You made an amazing documentary of your time in Shanghai.
On that point, Cyrus, I went to Shanghai for 3 weeks, and I was amazed. It was nothing. In a way, I hadn't been as amazed until I went to Riyadh and discovered how different that was to the preconceived perception I've been led to believe it was like. But yeah, I was stunned by China, actually. Well, let me put it this way. I was stunned by what I found in Shanghai.
But what's interesting, you went to Shanghai, which is the most cosmopolitan, most advanced modern society, in China, the biggest city. But go to the 5th tier, 6th tier cities, go to villages that have been transformed over the last 20 years. You'll be able to see continuous progress throughout all of China, from the big cities down to the small cities. Piers, there was a 10-year Harvard Business Review where they actually polled Chinese citizens and actually wanted to see the level of support for the government. But when you go down to these rural areas, these villages, this is where you find the biggest amount of support for China's government because they see the tangible results. I think that to answer to the key point of your question is, what is China's vision for the world? What does China want to achieve? The first thing is they have to take care of 1.4 billion people. Right along with India, China has one of the most populous nations in the world. It has a tremendous amount of responsibility. Yes, there's economic downturn right now, real estate crisis. I mean, it's not all, roses over there in China, but they're learning to deal with that. They're adapting. They're changing strategies. Again, they're moving forward, renewable energy, things that are completely transforming the future of our entire world. When you look at the Global South, and this is why the BRICS organization and the Global South is thriving right now, and why there's so much momentum in this movement, because a lot of people around the world, and again, you have to remove yourself from this Western media bubble and people that want to fearmonger about China and preach to you that, China hates America. China wants to take down America. That couldn't be further from the truth. Chinese people, when you go there and connect with them, they want to do business with America. Chinese has always been welcome to American business. And the simple fact is that I think China wants to have a multipolar world. They're never going to say, hey, we don't want you to work with America. We don't want you to work with the United States. In reality, China has been very, appreciative of America. They've been recognizing, hey, look, you're a superpower. We're a superpower. Why don't we, if you're a developing country in Africa, why don't you do business with both of us? We're not saying that you should only do business with China, but unfortunately, that is not the same case for the United States, which we continually go to Africa and we don't provide any investment. We don't provide any tangible benefits. We simply say, you should not be doing business with China because they're not a democracy like we are. But yet, look at the state of democracy in the United States. Vast majority of Americans would not agree that we are a democracy right now. So again, it's looking into that mirror and looking at how we can improve ourselves. This is what China is doing. They're looking at how can they improve, how can they advance, and how can they take care of their society. The stark contrast between the two is you have a government that is looking forward, taking care of their society. There's been so many wars, so many conflicts, so many trillions of US dollars that has been wasted for the American public. This is the biggest problem. And so, and again, what I see right now is a big problem. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a proud American. I love my country, but I see us being isolated on the world stage because of the actions of Donald Trump. And I've never seen America's reputation amongst the world, at the lowest point it is right now. Piers, you're a European. You understand this. Go to Europe. What is Americans' perception in Europe right now? Go to Canada. Go to Asia.
I want to leave.
Yep, there you have it, guys. So I thought that was fantastic commentary by Cyrus Jansen. And that has brought us to a close, guys. So this has been China, but at what cost? I hope you enjoyed it. Please like, share, subscribe. Again, there's an obligation to educate the community. Because again, so many of our people are just misled and misinformed, and they are just incentivized to just worship their ruling class oppressors, and it's just like it's really, really a shame. So again, China, but at what cost? Hope you guys enjoyed it. This is the end. Like, share, subscribe.